The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and ash as morning light broke over the treetops. Shifa stood alone in the clearing, his breath steaming in the cold air. In front of him loomed the familiar boulder, a stubborn beast that had resisted his every attempt to split it. Its surface was smooth in some places, jagged in others, like it mocked him. For years now, this stone had symbolized the wall between him and his dream. Just one strike, he muttered, gripping the wooden training sword. Just one clean strike. His muscles ached. Sweat dripped down his brow despite the mountain chill. He inhaled deeply and lunged, putting all his weight, strength, and focus into the swing. Thud. The sound echoed through the valley, but the boulder didn't even crack. He sank to his knees. Damn it! Behind him, leaning against a tree, Rose had been watching silently. Her long crimson hair fluttered in the breeze like a warrior's flag. She was calm, unreadable, but her eyes held warmth. She'd seen him try and fail more times than she could count, but never once mocked him. Still not there, huh? She said lightly, stepping forward. I gave it everything, he replied, clenching his fists, and it didn't even chip. You've gotten stronger, she said, crouching beside him. 4 years ago you couldn't even lift a sword. Shifa laughed bitterly. And yet here I am, still losing to a rock. Rose flicked his forehead with 2 fingers. Then maybe it's not the rock's fault. He looked at her, his frustration melting into something more complex. You could split that thing on your worst day. You said all adventurers can do that. You beat a dragon. I also said, she replied, standing and walking toward the boulder, that you have to be stronger than anyone else. Strong enough to fight me, as an equal. Those words hung in the air. Come, she said, drawing her twin spears with a smooth, almost lazy grace. It's time. Shifa blinked. Time. You've broken the boulder, you've slain the valley's dragon, you've done everything I asked. I didn't, he started, but she raised a hand. I was watching. You think I'd let you fight a dragon alone without being nearby? Her lips curved into a smirk. This is your final test. If you want to call yourself an adventurer, you'll have to land a hit on me. The duel began without further warning. Rose's movements were like poetry, fluid, precise and deadly. She lunged, and Shifa barely sidestepped in time. Their wooden weapons clashed again and again, sending vibrations through Shifa's bones. But he had grown. He wasn't the scared boy from years ago. He anticipated her rhythm. He saw the faint shift in her stance that preceded her spin, the twitch in her fingers before she reversed her grip. And finally, he moved first. He ducked beneath her swing and aimed for her side. She blocked, but not in time. The blow glanced off her ribs. A hit. Rose's eyes widened. He followed up instantly, pressing the advantage. Her weapon flew from her hand, and for a moment the mighty Rose stumbled, her balance off. She leapt back, drew her second sword, and in one fluid motion, sent Shifa flying into the dirt with a brutal arc of magic-infused energy. Groaning, Shifa coughed dust from his lungs. You had a second one. Rose approached, lowering her weapon. She extended her hand. You always knew I carried 2, she said, but I never expected I'd need to use the second one against you. He took her hand, letting her pull him up. So, I passed? He asked, cautiously hopeful. She smiled at him, not the teasing grin of a superior, but the gentle, proud smile of an older sister. You're ready. The wind picked up again, scattering petals from the wild flowers nearby. Shifa felt something swell in his chest, relief, pride, and a strange sadness. Then, I'll be leaving soon. Yes, she said. You'll register as an adventurer, go to the guild in Cardia, make a name for yourself. They stood in silence for a moment. Will you be okay without me? He asked, half joking. Rose reached out and ruffled his hair, the way she always did when they were younger. I was the one asking you that all these years. He looked away, suddenly shy. I'll make you proud. You already did. That night, Shifa sat by the fireplace. Rose was packing his bag, way more than he needed. Potions, maps, food, a few extra books, a flask of hot tea. He watched her fuss and realized that for all her strength, all her bluster, She was worried. Sis, she paused. I'll come back, not just as your little brother, but as a fellow adventurer. She turned to him, nodded once, and that was enough. In the morning he stepped beyond their little mountain home, and into the world. The sun rose behind him, casting a long shadow that stretched toward the future. Shifa didn't know what awaited him, but he knew who he was. He was a trainee no more. He was an adventurer. The sky was brushed with soft clouds drifting across the midday sun, casting warm shadows over the urban skyline. The Rokushin Kaiokon building loomed tall behind them, glass windows glinting as if reflecting the calm before a storm. Beneath its towering presence, two men strolled at a leisurely pace along the quiet park path, the hum of the city muffled by the trees and distance. Sugawara Yutaka, a man in his 50s with a round face and cheerful demeanor, adjusted his glasses with a fond smile. I hate to do this to Murasumi, he chuckled, but I'm just glad that Narashima won. Beside him, taller and more stoic in presence, Kashio Toru walked with his hands in his pockets, the late summer breeze rustling his open vest. There was something quietly charismatic about him, someone who didn't need to speak much to be understood. He'll make a good fighter, Kashio said calmly, eyes forward, expression unreadable. Sugawara tapped his cheek thoughtfully. He has Mr. Yamashita's endorsement, so he must have the skill to back it up. Kashio offered a rare smile, small, but sincere. He's no slouch. As they strolled under the tall trees, their conversation shifted to shared acquaintances. Have you met Mr. Yamashita, by the way? Sugawara asked. Only once, Kashio replied, glancing sideways. He came to observe an employment exam I was supervising. Oh, is that so? Sugawara tilted his head curiously. Their steps brought them near the park's edge, where stone markers bore the faded symbols of an old school entrance. It was quiet, too quiet. Kashio looked around. That's funny, he murmured. Sugawara followed his gaze, blinking. Oh, it's the middle of the day, but there's not a child in sight, right? Summer vacation's over, isn't it? Kashio said. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the atmosphere just slightly off, as if the usual rhythm of life had skipped a beat. It was the kind of silence that settled in just before something changed. Something shifted in the air. There was a silence not peaceful, but taut, as though the wind itself had gone still in anticipation. Kashio Toru narrowed his eyes as he turned, his senses prickling. Shadows under the canopy seemed thicker now. The chirp of birds had ceased. There were no footsteps, but someone was there. Then, a voice broke the quiet, smooth, but charged with intent. Did you have business with me? Kashio's voice was calm. His body stood relaxed, yet his stance had subtly changed. Balanced, controlled, his fingers curled slightly, ready. From behind a tree-lined path, a man stepped into view, dressed like any salaryman. White shirt, striped tie, suspenders, but the glint in his glasses hid his eyes, and in his hand gleamed cold steel, a serrated combat knife, curved like a predator's fang. Oh, so you noticed, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he simply walked toward Kashio with measured confidence, the blade gleaming under the broken sunlight filtering through the leaves. Snap! With a sudden flick, Kashio's hands tensed, and wire, thin and sharp, unfurled between his clenched fists. It shimmered like silver thread, but bore the deadly tension of a whip. Its presence crackled, invisible but unmistakable. They faced each other in the middle of the path, a casual walkway, now transformed into the silent stage of an ambush. One held a knife, the other a coil of tensioned wire. Neither looked surprised, neither seemed afraid. The trees bore witness, unmoving, and in that breath before the clash, the whole world held still. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the dirt lot near the construction site. Cranes loomed like skeletal giants over the unfinished building, and scattered vehicles clustered around the edges. Police cruisers, ambulances, and the black sedans of the Kengan Association. The chaos of earlier was gone now, replaced with a quiet tension, the kind that lingers after violence, and in the center of it all sat Gao Ryuki, bloodied, bruised, but upright. His bare chest was caked with dried sweat and grime. each muscle tense beneath the surface like coiled steel. His tangled black hair clung to his shoulders, and a cold pack had been clumsily taped to his forehead. A towel hung around his neck, damp with melted ice and blood. The wind stirred the fabric behind him. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. His eyes, partially shadowed, stared forward with vacant calm, the kind that unsettled more than any scream of agony ever could. From a respectful distance, two officials in formal attire approached. One was a sharply dressed man, with the clipped tone of a bureaucrat. The other, a woman in a tailored blazer, held a clipboard against her chest. "We'll be transporting you to a hospital partnered with the Kengan Association," the man explained, voice neutral, but not unkind. The woman added gently, "If the tests all come back negative, you'll be cleared to go." Neither expected an answer. Ryuki didn't give one. He just sat there, framed by the shadows of the warehouse, a silent monument to a battle already over, yet heavy with questions. The sun reflected faintly off his bruises, and behind those calm eyes, something flickered, not fear, not pain, something deeper. The dull hum of distant traffic underscored the stillness in the aftermath of the match. The air was thick, not with tension, but with concern. Inside the makeshift medical area of the site, Ryuki sat slumped against the wall, still shirtless, his skin glistening with cold sweat and dried blood. His towel drooped from his shoulder, and the ice pack remained stuck to his forehead, as if he didn't care enough to remove it. His eyes were open, but they didn't seem to see. A voice, soft, but edged with anxiety, broke the silence. "Are you okay, Ryuki?" asked Akiyama Kaede, her blazer wrinkled from rushing around, clipboard forgotten under her arm. She stepped closer, eyes darting over his battered frame. "Do you have a headache? Nausea?" Ryuki blinked slowly, and turned his gaze up toward her. "This is nothing to me," he said flatly, brushing sweat-soaked hair from his brow. Kaede hesitated. "Why are you making such a big deal of this, Kaede?" His words weren't sharp, they were eerily calm, like a man wondering why someone would cry over a dropped teacup. Behind her stood Yamashita Kazuo, hands clasped in front of him, his expression lined with worry that only experience and too many close calls could carve. "Ryuki," he began carefully, his voice thin, "did you black out during the—" He didn't finish the question, because the real question hung unspoken between them. "Did you know what you were doing?" Ryuki leaned back again, pressing a palm to his temple. For a second, his eyes flickered, a shadow passed behind them, a pause, a breath. Outside the sun was setting. Inside something else was rising. From the far side of the scaffolding, a figure emerged, muscular, quiet, his presence felt before he even spoke. Ryuki didn't look up, but he knew someone was there. His shoulders tensed. The silence grew heavy again. The tension for a moment loosened, like a knot slowly beginning to unravel. Standing in the half-light of the warehouse entry was Narashima Koga, clad in a dark tank top, shoulders squared, bandage on his cheek, and arms crossed with casual firmness. His body was tense, but his face wasn't. His eyes, sharp, tired, but clear, were fixed on Ryuki. Across the room, Ryuki finally turned his head. A slight smile played on his lips, barely visible beneath the bruises. In one hand, he held a bottled drink, fingers wrapped around it with surprising gentleness. "Hey Koga," he said, voice soft, eyes half-lidded. "How'd your exam go?" The way he said it, like it was a question from any other day, made the moment feel strangely normal, as if they weren't standing in the aftermath of something that had nearly broken them both. Koga didn't answer right away. He just stared at Ryuki, taking in the cuts, the ice pack, the calm in his voice, and maybe something else, something quieter, buried beneath Ryuki's gaze. There was no anger, no judgment, just a pause. The rooftop was bathed in the cool hues of dusk. The sky stretched wide above them, tinged with deep blue and streaks of fading crimson. Below, the city carried on, unaware of the two young men standing far above, caught in a quiet conversation that weighed more than it let on. Koga remained standing, arms relaxed at his sides, while Ryuki sat against the fencing, one leg stretched, the other bent lazily, his fingers curled loosely around a drink can, but his thoughts seemed far away. "Doesn't it hurt?" Koga asked, voice quiet, but cutting through the stillness like a blade sheathed in velvet. Ryuki didn't answer at first. The question didn't seem to surprise him. Instead, he tilted his head toward the sky, as if recalling a distant memory, something long buried beneath bruises, silence, and ritual. Not really, he said softly. I always got hurt like this. His voice lacked bitterness. It was simply a truth, casual, clinical, as if pain was something familiar, ordinary. My grandpa was really hard on me, Ryuki added, his eye half-lidded, gaze heavy, so I don't even count this as getting hurt. Koga's eyes narrowed, brows slightly furrowed. The image of Ryuki, battered yet unflinching, felt all too familiar, but unsettling now. The kind of toughness that didn't come from discipline, but from something darker, from being told you weren't allowed to cry. Then, after a pause, Koga asked the question that lingered unspoken in both their chests. Why did you stop? His voice was firmer now, not accusatory, but seeking, demanding an answer, demanding honesty. Ryuki didn't answer right away. The wind tugged gently at the torn edges of the tarp beside them. The rooftop was quiet, and then, silence. Because the answer wasn't easy, and maybe it wasn't one Ryuki knew himself. The golden light of early evening bathed the rooftop, in warm tones. Below, the construction site was still busy, a mess of cranes, equipment, and half-laid foundations, stretching toward the horizon. From this height, it all looked smaller, distant, like the world was holding its breath. Koga remained seated near the ledge, knees drawn up, watching the movement below. Ryuki now stood beside him, arms folded, one eye shadowed, the other calm, detached. Near the end of the match, Koga began, eyes not leaving the skyline. You stopped moving, just for a second. Ryuki didn't respond immediately. If it weren't for that, Koga added, the match would have still been up in the air. There was no judgment in his tone, just honesty. A matter-of-fact statement from someone who had been in the thick of it, who had seen a moment shift the tide. Ryuki raised a hand to the back of his head, and scratched lazily, his brow furrowed, confused. He blinked slowly, like someone waking from a fog. There was a pause, a genuine one. Koga turned to glance at him. What, you didn't notice? Ryuki looked slightly surprised. Oh, okay, I guess I did stop moving. His words were soft, almost like he was admitting something to himself more than to Koga. There was no excuse, no explanation, just the fact, hanging in the air like mist, and for a second, the silence between them said more than any question ever could. The rooftop, wind shifted, cool and sharp against skin still warming from battle. Ryuki's voice came quieter now, as if the weight of the thought pulled it down. Akoya said something like that after the match, he murmured, gaze drifting. Koga looked up at him. He asked, why did you hesitate? As he spoke, Ryuki's mind slipped backward, back to the arena, back to the towering figure that stood across from him beneath blinding stadium lights. His fists still stung from that clash. His muscles remembered the resistance of that man's body, how unrelenting, how inhuman he felt. Akoya Seishu. He wasn't just strong, he was terrifying. The memory formed itself like a dark painting across Ryuki's mind. Grit, violence, blackened vision, and eyes that never wavered. Akoya had been the strongest opponent Ryuki had faced in the Kengan matches, far and away. No contest. He was pretty strong, Ryuki thought plainly, but even as he said it, something else stirred. I wonder who's stronger, him, or Grandpa. His tone was neutral, almost innocent, but Koga's eyes twitched at the implication. What kinda monster is this guy's grandpa, anyway? Koga muttered, scratching the back of his head, unease crawling in. The contrast between them was clear. Koga fought to get stronger. Ryuki forged, by someone else's terrifying hand, the kind of strength that didn't come from ambition, but survival. And that moment of hesitation in the ring, maybe it wasn't weakness, maybe it was memory. The rooftop silence was broken only by the dull metallic clang of Ryuki's heel, tapping against the steel ledge, as he settled down beside Koga. The air was turning cooler now, a quiet signal that night was drawing in. And yet, the real chill came from Ryuki's voice. There's only one way, he said, as if discussing something mundane, to beat an opponent on that level. Koga turned his head slightly. The tone, it wasn't angry, it wasn't proud,
It was honest, blunt. To beat someone like that, Ryuki's gaze narrowed. You have to kill him. The words echoed in Koga's ears like distant thunder, not shouted, not emphasized, just stated. Ryuki looked ahead, into the distance, not to avoid Koga's gaze, but because he didn't need to justify it. To him, it was logical, practiced, the lesson of a lifetime.
In fact, he added, placing one hand behind him to support his weight, I was just about ready to kill him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Koga didn't interrupt. He didn't blink, because Ryuki wasn't done. But then, he said, softer now, a shift. I remembered, he looked at Koga now, just slightly, not directly, but enough. What you said to me the other day, and in that moment, there it was. The reason he hesitated, the reason the blade didn't fall, Koga's words, his presence, the tether that pulled Ryuki back from that edge. That simple human reminder that he wasn't just a weapon, he was someone with a choice. A gust of wind tugged at the hem of Ryuki's towel as he rose to his feet. He stretched out an arm and mimed a punch, not for show, but as if feeling the motion again, revisiting a moment that had passed yet never truly left. I guess I have been killing people, he said. There was no tremor in his voice, no hesitation, just that flat, practiced honesty again, the kind that lands harder than any blow. Koga's face tensed, lips parting slightly in disbelief. But, like I said back then, Ryuki added quickly, trying to clarify, I haven't been killing normal people, okay? Look, Koga cut in, voice firm, that's not the issue here, but Ryuki kept going. Yeah, he said with a faint, distant nod. That's what you said back then too. He didn't argue. He acknowledged. And yet he seemed unable to fully grasp the weight of the thing he was saying. Not because he didn't understand it, but because it had been carved so deeply into him that he didn't know how else to think. But you know, he continued, turning his back to Koga now as he faced the city skyline, it just didn't click with me. The golden light of the sunset painted both of them in long, thin shadows. I thought. His voice dipped. What's wrong with killing someone who's trying to kill you? A long silence followed. Behind them, in the corridor leading back inside, Kaidi and Yamashita stood listening. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The words lingered in the air between all of them like gunpowder dust. Koga looked at Ryuki's back. There was no malice there. No pride, just confusion. And something that felt an awful lot like guilt, trying to take shape in someone who was never taught how. The rooftop had grown darker, shadows stretching long and lean as the sun dipped further behind the distant skyline. The air felt colder now, or maybe it was the weight of Ryuki's words, hanging heavily between them. He sat upright, knees drawn up, resting his arm over one, staring out into nothing. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the scar on his side, the dried sweat on his skin shimmering faintly in the dying light. Something about it still bothers me, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His voice was quieter now, slower, the kind of tone that comes from a place deeper than thought, where instinct and memory collide in silence. He scratched the back of his head, eyes half-lidded. Am I going crazy? It was said so simply, so naturally, as if he were asking about the weather, but the words echoed louder in Koga's mind than any scream. Ryuki. Koga's eyes widened, every muscle in his body going still. The bluntness of the question caught him off guard, not just because of what Ryuki said, but because of how earnestly, how calmly he said it. Like it wasn't a cry for help, like it was a quiet resignation. A slow-burning realization passed through Koga's chest. This wasn't about the match anymore. This was a boy raised as a weapon, now trying to figure out if he could live as a person. And he didn't know how, not yet. The sky above the city burned with twilight fire, casting golden red light across the rooftop. In that light, Ryuki sat still, a shadowed figure marked by bruises and blood, staring out over a city he barely understood anymore. His words hung in the air like smoke. Am I going crazy? But Koga saw something else. Not a killer, not a monster, just a boy who had never been shown how to live without a blade in his hand. He's not a cold-blooded killer, he just doesn't know. That thought struck Koga like lightning to the chest. His hands trembled faintly at his sides. His jaw clenched. He looked at Ryuki, truly looked, not at his wounds, or his physique, but at the emptiness behind his eyes. At the way he held himself, still, guarded, almost like he was afraid of what he'd become, or maybe afraid that he no longer was. But it wasn't too late. Not yet. There's still time. Koga's eyes widened with sudden clarity. I can save Ryuki. It wasn't just a thought. It was a vow. Behind them, in the corridor just beyond the rooftop entrance, Yamashita Kazuo turned slightly, his gaze solemn. He had been listening, quietly, but with growing weight in his chest. Miss Akiyama, he said, voice low and steady. Beside him, Kaede peeked around the corner, her eyes soft but alert, waiting, because something important was happening up there, and they all knew it. The sunset had deepened into a burnt crimson, blanketing the city in a soft, melancholic glow. That brief, aching silence between two souls, the quiet after the storm, was shattered by a new presence. A familiar shadow stepped forward, towering, poised, and unflinching. Akoya Seishu stood tall, his back ramrod straight, his uniform pristine even in this fading light. His face betrayed no emotion, but his voice, deep and resolute, carried finality. I've made up my mind, he said, looking directly at Ryuki. The younger fighter straightened instinctively, sensing the weight behind the words. On two more representative fighters, Ryuki blinked. Wait, but the decision had already been made. A silent understanding passed between them. In the arena of fate, there was no room for hesitation. The box of destiny had been opened, and their names were now etched within it. GOA, Ryuki and Akoya Seishu tentatively entered in the competition. The words felt distant, like they were being carved into stone somewhere high above the city skyline. And indeed, the next image was the city itself, towering and still, its metal skeleton glowing faintly under the dusk. Neon lights flickered to life, windows blazed open, and the old INN building stood like a sentinel of normalcy. A last quiet before the storm ahead, because the games were about to begin, and there would be no turning back. Elsewhere in the city, away from rooftops and quiet resolve, a different kind of stillness lingered. The room was poorly lit, the wallpaper old and curling at the edges, the couch cushions were sagging. Rain tapped gently at the windows, distant and rhythmic, a lullaby for the damned. In the center of it all sat a man, lounging like a serpent in silk. Sheiji. His presence was casual, but something about it crawled. The crooked smirk, the half-lidded stare, the way he spun his phone between his fingers before finally answering the call. What? He said, voice playfully bored. Can you repeat that? On the other end of the line, the voice was sharper, clipped, formal. Yes sir, came the reply. The image cut to a man, bloodied, bruised, coat torn, but expression calm. He stood in the alley behind a burning dumpster, smoke curling past his collar. His shirt was splattered with red, one eye was swollen shut. My cover's been blown. Simple, direct, no emotion, but the tension in those words was palpable, the kind that crackled under the skin. Back in the dim room, Sheiji's smirk widened slightly, his fingers pausing mid-spin. Interesting. The game was shifting, and someone, maybe everyone, was about to get burned. The scene was eerily serene. Twilight lingered over an open field, its peace smeared by something far more grotesque. The charred remains of a man, still smoldering where he knelt. Smoke twisted upward from what was once his head, leaving only a blackened silhouette, and the distant echo of a scream that had already died out. Another man stood nearby, relaxed, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was light, cheerful, detached. Tilda, he hummed playfully. Sounds like you need more training. His words floated casually over the ashes like a lullaby sung after murder. This sure is tough work, he continued, strolling slowly. I guess it's really easy to slip up when you spend too long with someone you're close to. The implication wasn't just observation, it was judgment. A burnt fedora smoldered at the center of the field. Clothes, tools, remnants, all reduced to debris. Nearby, a pair of severed arms lay forgotten. On the other end of the call, the voice of the bruised informant returned, steady but carrying a weariness now. I don't think I can stay under cover. I'm going to lay low until the dust settles. From the comfort of his seat, Sheiji leaned back, spinning the phone cord around his fingers. Why don't you go to the hot spring? He offered, as if suggesting a casual vacation. Sure, we'll pick up the pieces after you. And that was that. Business, neatly closed. Elsewhere, a new thread moved into place. Narushima Koga stood quietly, hands tucked behind his back. Yeah, he said softly, almost to himself. He wasn't that bad. His voice was thoughtful, no trace of mockery, only reflection. He had changed, and now he was no longer a trainee. Narushima Koga's officially become a fighter. Not far off, in another location, a man with short hair and cool, calculating eyes raised a phone to his ear. He spoke calmly. I have a report for you, master. From the other end of the line came a simple, measured response. Oh right, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. The rooftop was quiet again. The wind had settled, leaving only the glow of city lights below, and the rhythmic blinking of distant cranes. Koga and Ryuki sat side by side, their earlier conversation still echoing in the back of Koga's mind. He looked toward the horizon, but didn't speak. That's when the thought struck him. Cold, clinical, we can use him as bait. He didn't say it aloud, but someone else had, somewhere else entirely, far from the open rooftop, and warm tones of a setting sun, deep in the bowels of shadow. Sheiji clicked his phone closed, a wicked grin tugging at his lips. He leaned back into the cracked leather seat, like a puppet master admiring his strings. All for the connector. The words were whispered with purpose. They weren't spoken to anyone in the room, but they were meant for everyone listening in the dark. Good work. Beep. The line disconnected. And just like that, another piece had been moved. Koga didn't know it. Ryuki didn't know it. But the eyes watching from the shadows had already chosen their roles. The war hadn't begun yet, but the trap was already set. The stars glittered faintly overhead, their light barely piercing the soft haze of the city night. The walkway beside Tanikawa General Hospital was quiet, save for the soft crunch of footsteps and the faint digital beeping from a phone call being connected. But I don't like shots, Ryuki muttered, dragging his feet like a sulking child. Beside him, Kaidi Akiyama rolled her eyes, adjusting her glasses with practiced patience. It's just an examination. Trailing just behind them, Yamashita Kazuo held his phone to his ear, the screen glowing against his glasses as a voice came through. His face, usually calm with worry, suddenly lit with shock. Koga, he called out, eyes wide. Koga turned instinctively. Huh? Koga, Kazuo repeated, holding up a hand, like he was trying to stop time. His voice dropped in urgency. Now listen, and promise me you won't freak out. Koga's brow furrowed. What? I just got a call, from CPW's Karachi. Kazuo's voice cracked on the name. A chill ran down Koga's back. Karachi Karugo, a name that didn't just echo influence. It carried weight, authority. And when someone like that made a call, it wasn't to check in. It was because something serious was about to begin. The night air was still and cool, as the group made their way toward Tanikawa General Hospital, its sterile white walls lit gently beneath scattered stars and fluorescent lamps. Their footsteps echoed faintly over the paved walkway. But I don't like shots, Ryuki grumbled, dragging his feet with the genuine dread of a child. It's just an examination, Kaidi Akiyama replied calmly, not looking back. Her tone was as practical as ever, but it carried a faint softness, understanding, maybe even concern. Just behind them, Narushima Koga walked with hands in his pockets, relaxed but alert. Beside him, Yamashita Kazuo fiddled nervously with his phone. Beep, beep, a call connected. Kazuo's eyes suddenly widened behind his thick glasses. Something serious flickered across his face. Koga, he called out sharply. Koga turned mid-step. Yeah? Kazuo rushed up to him, adjusting his glasses with a shaky hand. Listen, he said, lowering his voice, and promise me you won't freak out. Koga furrowed his brow. What is it? Kazuo drew in a breath. I just got a call from CPW's Karachi. Karachi Karugo. The name hit like a strike of thunder, hard, precise, and unignorable. For a moment, Koga just stood there, blinking. Something big was coming, something way above the level of medical checkups or recovery. And suddenly, the calm night no longer felt calm at all. Blood soaked the ring like ink spilled across parchment. The crowd had already fallen silent, long before the final blow. And now, in the wake of impact, there was only stillness, a cruel heavy silence that settled over the stadium, like a curtain pulled shut. On the floor of the Purgatory Arena, motionless and drenched in crimson, lay the shattered form of a man, once hailed as genius, Jose Kanzaki, the 4D Latino, a master of movement,
A dancer of damage, a tactician whose style pushed the boundary of dimension itself. But not today. Today, his eyes stared blankly toward the lights above, wide, white, and unblinking. His face was a canvas of ruin, crushed and contorted, his braided hair matted with sweat and blood. Jose lost, flat on his back, muscles limp, veins stilled, the arena beneath him, speckled with his failure. In the purgatory match today, no amount of foresight, calculation, or speed could stop what came for him. A shadow hovered just outside the blood-soaked ring, watching. Because here, in purgatory, victory didn't just mean survival, it meant erasure. It wasn't just a defeat, it was devastation. As the crowd stared in stunned horror at the brutalized body of Jose Kanzaki, the announcer's voice returned, quieter now, laced with tension. His opponent was the ex-sixth Fang of Matsudo. The lights flickered, and there, standing in the center of the ring, his back arched unnaturally, breath steaming, skin slick with blood and sweat, was Yumigahama Hikaru. His grin was wide, unblinking, animalistic. His shoulders shook, not with exhaustion, but thrill. He didn't celebrate the victory, he basked in it. This wasn't sport to him, it was slaughter. His wild, frenzied eyes scanned the crowd, as if still hunting, as though one victory wasn't enough to satisfy whatever madness gnawed at the edges of his soul. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a predator unleashed. Back outside the arena, under the glow of hospital lights, Koga's fists clenched tightly at his sides. Jose's in critical condition, Kazuo reported quietly, adjusting his glasses, and he hasn't woken up yet. Koga's jaw locked, his knuckles whitened. He'd seen injuries, he'd heard about near deaths in the ring, but something about this was different. Something about Yumigahama felt wrong. Not just powerful, but inhuman. This wasn't just a new player on the board. This was a warning. The white fluorescent lights of Tanikawa General Hospital hummed faintly above them, sterile and cold. Footsteps echoed off the pristine floor tiles as Koga made his way down the corridor, muscles tense beneath his black tank top, expression unreadable. A familiar voice called out to him. "Funny coincidence that we'd be at the same hospital," said a man, leaning casually against the wall near the operating room. It was Seki Bayashi Jun, former pro wrestler, built like a fortress, arms crossed, his tone casual, but eyes sharp. "Hey Koga, did Mr. Yamashita fill you in already?" Koga nodded slowly. "Yeah, we haven't told Kade or Ryuki yet though." He glanced toward the doors marked operating. He got beaten pretty bad in his match, so they're giving him a thorough exam. The hallway quieted around them. Even the usual hospital murmurs seemed to lower their volume near that door. Seki Bayashi looked straight ahead, arms still crossed, but his voice dropping. "How's Jose?" Koga's lips pressed together, his jaw clenched before answering. "Not good." Seki Bayashi let out a long breath.
It'll all be up to his will to live, they say. Those words echoed down the sterile hallway like a challenge tossed into the void. Across the corridor, the sign above the operating room glowed like a fragile beacon. Operating, and behind it the fate of a fighter hung by a thread. The hallway still carried the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of hospital machinery. But to Sekibayashi Jun, everything felt a little heavier now. He stood quietly for a long moment, arms folded, as if searching the floor for the right words. Then he looked up at Koga, gaze steady. "I didn't watch the match," Koga admitted, arms crossed, brows low, "but I'm told it was pretty one-sided." Jun nodded, the creases in his scarred face deepening. "I'd say Yumigahama's in the top class of purgatory right now." There was no bitterness in his tone, just honesty, the kind that comes from someone who knows what real power looks like, and what it means to face it without delusion. A pause followed, then Jun exhaled, slow and deep. "Koga, you mind telling Mr. Yamashita for me?" Koga looked up, "That Haruo and I won't be entering the competition." The words hit with quiet finality, no drama, no outburst, just a decision made with full clarity, born not of fear, but wisdom. Koga didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply looked away, eyes shadowed beneath his brows. "I can't blame you," he murmured, "because after what Yumigahama did to Jose, how could anyone?" The hallway lights flickered behind them as Koga and Sekibayashi Jun stood in the corner of the hospital, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. Jun's fists were clenched, not from rage, but from something deeper, power restrained. If anything happened to you or Haruo, Koga said slowly, SJPW wouldn't be able to go on. It wasn't a guilt trip, it was a fact. Jun closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling. Jose's gonna have to take an extended leave. His words hung low, heavy, and then Jun added, quietly, but firmly, we belong to an organization, we have to fill the hole that Jose left behind. He remembered the locker room, the silence after the news, the look in Haruo's eyes, wide and shaken, but not from fear, from grief, from helplessness. Inside the gym, Haruo was sparring, sort of. Trainers moved around him, encouraging him to breathe, keep his form, keep his heart steady. His massive body trembled with effort, but it wasn't physical exhaustion, it was emotional. We get that. Haruo and I both. Jun's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. It was a fair fight. We've got no reason to hate Yumigahama. The logic made sense, but sense didn't change the feeling in his gut. But still, his voice boomed in the corridor. Koga flinched slightly. His breath caught. Jun's hand slammed into the wall beside him, veins bulging, the floor quaking ever so slightly from the force. That was it. The scream of frustration, of helplessness, of being forced to watch instead of fight, not because they were afraid, but because they had something, someone, to protect. Sekabayashi Jun exhaled hard, his massive shoulders rising and falling with the breath. Sweat clung to his brow, but it wasn't from exhaustion, it was from the storm of emotion slowly settling in his chest. Phew. He glanced down at his trembling hands, still clenched from the frustration earlier, then he looked at Koga, and a faint smirk curved the edge of his lips. At least Jose didn't go down for nothing. Koga tilted his head. Jun straightened his back, the familiar steadiness returning to his voice. Jose broke Yumigahama's dominant arm. Koga's eyes widened slightly. His right arm. The image flashed in his mind. Yumigahama, crazed and victorious. Yes, but clutching his arm. His flesh torn, muscle contorted, bone shattered beneath the skin. Blood had streamed from the break like a faucet turned too far. That hadn't been showboating. That had been pain. True, undeniable damage. 2 months, Jun added. At least, that's how long it'll take to heal. Koga nodded, eyes narrowing. So he'll be stuck in treatment right up until the competition. Exactly, Jun said. He might recover in time, but he won't be at his best. And that meant something. A glimmer of hope. A door left cracked open. Jose hadn't just fought. He'd left his mark. Even in defeat, he mattered. The day had started with tension already clinging to the air. In the reinforced hall of the Kengan Association's training facility, the kind of place where bodies were hardened, and pride was broken, Narushima Koga stood in the center of the mat, fists raised and breath ragged. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, muscles twitching from exertion and stress. Across from him, his opponent stood calm and composed, not a bead of sweat on his brow, as if the match had been little more than a warm-up for him. Koga lunged, the sharp tap of feet on the mat, followed by the dull thud of glove on rib. He landed a hit, finally, but the man barely flinched. Then came the counter, a hook that sent Koga's world spinning. His back hit the mat with a crack, air burst from his lungs, and the ceiling lights above blurred into twin suns. It wasn't just pain, it was a judgment. Silence fell over the gym. The few others watching looked away, as though embarrassed for him. Koga lay there for a moment longer, every inch of him aching, but not just from the fight, from the shame. The shame of knowing that he wasn't enough. Later, in the locker room, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, as if echoing the static in Koga's head. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, blood on his lower lip, a bruise blossoming on his cheek. He didn't look like a Kengan fighter, he looked like a kid pretending to be one. The phone buzzed once on the bench beside him. He picked it up. A single message, a name. Ryuki. The name meant something. Koga had heard it in whispers, in the quiet corners of gyms and locker rooms, where real fighters spoke of monsters. Ryuki was said to be a ghost, a remnant of a blood-stained lineage, a boy trained not in dojos, but in dens, raised to fight, not to live. Intrigued and desperate for meaning, Koga tracked him down. They met behind a small shrine, surrounded by withered trees and drifting leaves. Ryuki stood alone, barefoot on the stone walkway, feeding sparrows that fluttered fearlessly around him. His appearance was unassuming, slim, quiet, like a breeze made solid, but his eyes were hollow, not dead, but untouched. Are you Koga? Yeah. Do you want to fight me? No. I want to train with you. Ryuki blinked slowly, as if surprised, then he nodded once and turned. From that day on, they trained. Ryuki was unlike anyone Koga had met. His movements were surgical, almost without wasted motion, and his understanding of the human body was eerie. He didn't just strike, he dismantled. He wasn't fast in the way sprinters were, or strong in the way lifters were. He was efficient, purposeful. Koga struggled. Every punch he threw was answered. Every tactic he tried was dissected. Ryuki never gloated, never spoke unless prompted, but each day he broke Koga down a little more. And yet, something changed. In the quiet between sparring sessions, over shared rice balls and bottles of barley tea, Koga began to see flickers of something inside Ryuki. A softness, a faint smile, when a cat passed between their legs, a pause to help an old woman pick up her dropped groceries, moments of being human. Koga asked him once, "Why do you fight like that?" Ryuki had looked up at the sky. "Because I was raised to kill." There was no anger in it, no pride, just truth. Their training continued for weeks. The bruises faded slower, but Koga got faster, stronger, sharper. He began to see the openings, to anticipate the shifts in Ryuki's shoulders, the twitch of a foot before the strike. One night, after a particularly brutal sparring session, they sat on the shrine steps, watching the moonrise. Koga was nursing a cut above his eye, holding a can of coffee to it. "I think I'm getting closer," he said. Ryuki nodded. "You are." Then came the call. Koga was summoned by the association. It wasn't a request, it was an order. A higher-up had taken interest, and so, Koga found himself walking through a quiet park one afternoon, accompanied by Sugawara Yutaka and Kashio Toru, two men with long histories and heavier reputations. Sugawara laughed, his round frame bouncing slightly with each step. "I feel bad for Murasame, but I'm glad Narushima won. That kid's got guts." Kashio remained silent for a moment, then said, "He'll make a good fighter." Sugawara glanced sideways. "You met Yamashita before?" Kashio nodded. "Once. He came to observe one of the employment exams I supervised." They walked further, through a school park now eerily empty. "Strange," Kashio murmured. "It's the middle of the day, but there's no one around." Sugawara chuckled. "Probably after school, but yeah, it is quiet. Too quiet." From the corner of his eye, Kashio spotted movement. A man stepped from behind the trees, pale, gaunt, dressed like an office worker, but the gleam in his eyes was something feral. In his hand was a knife. Kashio raised his head. "Did you have business with me?" The man smiled thinly. "Oh, so you noticed." He stepped forward. Kashio's hand dropped subtly to his side, unwinding a nearly invisible thread of wire. His stance shifted. The air thickened. A predator had appeared, and another answered. Back at the hospital, the mood was starkly different. Koga Ryuki sat on the exam table, shirtless, a cold pack resting on his head. He wasn't bruised, he was broken, not physically. Something inside him had fractured, and no one knew how to reach it. Kaidi Akiyama stood near him, trying to keep her voice gentle. "Are you okay, Ryuki? Any nausea? Pain?" He blinked slowly. "This is nothing to me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ryuki, this isn't normal." Yamashita Kashio stepped forward. "Ryuki, did you black out during the match?" Ryuki didn't respond. Koga entered the room. His presence brought a flicker of recognition to Ryuki's eyes. "Hey Koga," he said. "How'd your exam go?" Koga narrowed his eyes. "Forget that." "Ryuki, doesn't it hurt?" Ryuki smiled faintly. "Not really. My grandpa was rougher. This doesn't count as pain." Koga stared. "Ryuki, why did you stop during the match?" Ryuki tilted his head. "Did I stop?" "Yeah," Koga said. "Right near the end. You hesitated." Ryuki's face shifted. Just a little. A shadow passed through his eyes. "I remembered what you said," he admitted quietly. "That killing isn't normal." Koga felt his breath catch. Ryuki looked down at his hands. "I've killed before. I thought it was okay."
that if they were trying to kill me, it was fine. Silence settled like dust, and Kaidi stepped back. Yamashita said nothing. I don't know anymore. Ryuki. Am I going crazy? Koga's heart clenched. No, you're just human. He made a silent promise to himself in that moment. He would save Ryuki, even if Ryuki didn't know he needed saving. A train sped along the curved rails, overlooking the seaside city of Atami, its metallic body reflecting the bright morning sun. Below the winding tracks, the city stretched out across the coastline, buildings nestled tightly against one another, and hugging the bay, while green hills loomed protectively in the distance. The breeze from the ocean whispered through the leaves, and birds coasted lazily in the sky above. Inside a traditional Japanese inn, nestled at the edge of the forested hills, the atmosphere was still. A corridor lined with wooden flooring and paper panel walls led to a quiet room, where a man sat, cross-legged, and completely absorbed in his writing. Papers were stacked in messy towers around him, and the rhythmic sound of a fountain pen scratched steadily across a manuscript. His name was Tokunoo Tokamichi, also known as Toku. His unruly dark hair spilled over his shoulders, his glasses slightly crooked, and his face was calm yet focused. He wrote with a sort of intensity, as if the act of putting thoughts to paper was more than just storytelling, it was survival. Suddenly, footsteps disturbed the silence. At the door, two figures appeared. One was a tall, elegant woman, in a sleeveless cheongsam dress, Katahara Sayaka. Beside her stood a man with thick glasses, an anxious expression, and a slightly hunched posture, Yamashita Kashio. Toku did not look back immediately. The scratching of his pen halted, as if sensing something important. Then, calmly, he turned his head slightly toward the voice. I'll enter, he said. His tone was flat, but there was an undercurrent of resolve. Your competition with purgatory. Kashio blinked. Sayaka's brows raised ever so slightly. The man who had secluded himself in a mountain inn, to write novels and squander his money, was offering to return to the battlefield. His name was announced internally, like the echo of thunder. Tokunoo Tokamichi, a man shrouded in myth and ridicule alike. Kashio looked relieved, though a touch confused. I guess Natoku blew through all his money again. Sayaka muttered with a sigh. Apparently, Toku had stayed at the inn for months, never leaving, constantly writing, and finally racking up a bill he could no longer pay. His call for help had been born of desperation. Ryuki, who had accompanied them, sat down awkwardly, and stared at the manuscript that Toku passed to him. The reclusive writer pushed his glasses up, and asked calmly, Are you interested in novels? I don't get many chances to receive feedback from readers. Would you give me your honest opinion? Ryuki looked startled by the question, but nodded. His eyes scanned the pages with surprising intensity. His inner monologue was a tumble of reactions. The writing was full of large, complex words, yet the story was too simple. He noted how the dialogue felt unnatural, and how the exposition dumps made it feel like he was reading a textbook. You might want to put a twist in there somewhere, Ryuki offered honestly, his brow furrowed, as he held the manuscript with both hands. Toku's expression didn't change, though a vein twitched slightly near his temple. He gave a tight smile. I see. Well, I prefer to write in a style that appeals to a wider audience. Ryuki continued, unaware of the growing awkwardness. The setting doesn't really draw me in, and the pacing. Sayaka, clearly sensing where this was going, placed a firm hand on Ryuki's shoulder. Okay Ryuki, that's enough. Off to the side. Kashio was quietly impressed. He thought to himself, amused, that Ryuki must have really been working on his reading and writing skills. In the past, this kind of conversation would have been impossible. Back in Tokyo, at the Yamashita Trading Company, a familiar and ridiculously loud personality had returned. Ryukio, also known as the Superman, with a wide toothy grin, and eyes sparkling with exaggerated affection, he shouted, I missed you so much Akiyama. Akiyama Kaidi, ever composed and professional, greeted him with a polite smile. Ryukio. I'm glad to see you're doing well. Ryukio, clearly not satisfied with just words, spread his arms wide. Bring it in. Gimme a hug. Kaidi shoved a hand into his face, and pushed him away, still smiling. Thanks, but no thanks. From a short distance, Koga and Kaneda watched the spectacle. Kaneda, holding his ever-present folding fan, smiled knowingly. That's an accurate description. Koga narrowed his eyes. You're telling me this guy, who looks like a big dog in heat, is a friend of yours? Yes, unfortunately, Kaneda replied without hesitation. Ryuki, unfazed, turned his attention to Kaidi once more. Okay. Formalities can wait. Kaidi, hook me up with a Kengan match, right away. I gotta prove that I've got the power to represent you. Kaidi tilted her head. Right away. Aren't you tired from your trip? Don't you need to rest? Don't worry about me. I'm tough as nails, Ryuki declared, posing with dramatic flair. Koga crossed his arms. But talk is cheap, you know, so let me prove it to you in the match. Before anyone could respond further, the door to the office creaked open. A large dark-skinned man, with sharp features, and a muscular build, entered with a casual swagger. Well, aren't you a real man's man? He said, eyeing Ryuki with a sly smirk. I gotta say, I like your type. The entire room froze. Kaidi's face drained of color. You. Koga's jaw dropped. Kaneda's expression twisted with unease. Oh? Ryuki blinked, caught off guard. Who the hell are you? The man didn't answer. He simply closed the door behind him with a soft click, his gaze unwavering, and oddly intense. What followed was silence, a hanging tension that crackled through the air. Back in Atami, the quiet inn surrounded by green hills, had become a new stage for something brewing beneath the surface. Toku leaned back slightly, stacking his manuscript papers, and gazing out the open shoji screen at the mountains beyond. Ryuki, meanwhile, looked down at the unfinished critique in his hands, unsure of whether to feel bad or proud. There was more to come. The roster was far from full. New fighters had to be contacted, old ones convinced to return, and the unknown cards had yet to reveal their strength. In a competition where pride, power, and ideology clashed, every piece mattered. And in the dimly lit corridors of the Yamashita office, with fresh blood arriving, and old ghosts knocking at the door, the storm was only just beginning to gather. The sun dipped low over Atami, casting a golden shimmer across the sea, as a train wound its way along the coastline. Inside a quiet ryukin, nestled in the hills above town, a steady scratching echoed off paper screens. The source was a man seated cross-legged at a low table, surrounded by towering stacks of manuscripts. Ink flowed from his fountain pen, as he filled page after page, of grid-lined paper with delicate, practiced characters. His name was Tokunoo Tokumichi, though many simply called him Toku too. Despite his once renowned strength, in the underground fighting world, he had
withdrawn into the shadows. Now he poured his passion into writing, cocooned in the peaceful solitude of the mountains, until a knock shattered the quiet. Yamashita Kazuo and Katahara Sayaka entered hesitantly. Kazuo, sweating and anxious as ever, pushed his glasses up his nose. Sayaka stood tall beside him, radiating poise. They had come with news. Without turning, Toku too spoke in a calm, low tone. I'll enter your competition with Purgatory. Kazuo blinked in confusion. What? Toku too finally looked over his shoulder, his gaze sharp but distant. His long hair framed a face marked with the wear of time and discipline. Kazuo stammered, while Sayaka simply nodded. The next moment, Toku too stood and turned fully. Let me fight. It turned out that Toku too had been staying at the inn ever since his last bout. He had run through his savings, too caught up in writing his novel to manage his expenses. A call for help had brought Kazuo to his door. Ryuki, who had accompanied Kazuo, stared curiously at the manuscripts. Toku too noticed. You there? Toku too said. Are you interested in novels? Ryuki stiffened. Yeah, I guess. Toku too handed over a thick stack of paper. It's unfinished, but I would appreciate your honest opinion. Ryuki's eyes widened as he skimmed through the draft. His brows furrowed. Well, the story itself is pretty simple, he said. A lot of big words, and the dialogue feels unnatural. Oh, and the setting's kind of hard to picture. Too many info dumps. Feels like I'm reading a textbook. Toku too flinched. Ryuki continued, unaware. You might want to put a twist in there somewhere. Kazuo, watching in shock, thought to himself. so he can read novels now. He's really been working on his reading and writing. Sayaka finally stepped in to stop the critique. Okay, Ryuki, that's enough. Back in Tokyo, inside the offices of Yamashita Trading Company, Ryuto, the self-styled Superman, was practically skipping with joy. A vision of Kaede Akiyama in his head made his heart beat faster. I missed you so much, Akiyama. When they finally met, Akiyama greeted him politely, but when he reached in for a hug, she blocked him with a sharp smile. Thanks, but no thanks. Aw, come on. Ryuto whined. Kaneda Suikichi watched the whole exchange, expression unreadable. Next to him, Narashima Koga muttered. You're telling me this guy that looks like a big dog in heat is a friend of yours? Ryuto turned to Kaede. Hook me up with a Kengan match right away. I gotta prove I've got the power to represent you. You just got back, she replied. Don't you need rest? Don't worry about me. I'm tough as nails. Before anyone could respond, a new presence entered the office. The door creaked open, revealing a mountain of muscle dressed in a tank top and slacks. With a devilish grin, the man stepped inside. Sup, Koga, he said casually. Sounds like things are getting real interesting. Let me declare my candidacy for the competition. Everyone turned toward him, stunned. He was known as the Wolf Soldier, Otsubuki Kokoro. His broad shoulders and confident swagger filled the room with tension. Kokoro pointed at Ryuto. You're Ryuto the Ripper, right? If I can take you down, I can prove I'm on par with the legends. Ryuto cracked his knuckles, grin spreading. So that makes you my competitor, huh? Kaede pinched the bridge of her nose. I'm sorry to disappoint you two, but we have no plans for you to fight each other. Both men cried in unison. While the two bickered, Kaneda observed with a calm eye. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them won, he mused. This could turn out to be a fascinating matchup. Koga, however, focused on the bigger picture. Which one's gonna be the representative? There were no answers yet, only questions, and the fire between Ryuto and Kokoro would not die down so easily. Elsewhere, the gears of the tournament continued to turn. Across the country, warriors prepared, old alliances were rekindled, and rivalries sharpened. What had begun as a chaotic scramble to build a team was fast becoming a crucible in which legends would be forged. And Tokunoo Tokumichi, seated once again at his table in the mountains, dipped his pen back into ink. As the wind rustled through the open shoji doors, he began to write anew, the story of fists and will and fate continuing both on paper and in blood. A summer evening sun cast long, golden beams over the rooftop, where two bruised and battered fighters sat, silhouettes framed against the fading glow of twilight. One stood, his shoulders tense with the remnants of adrenaline. The other sat calmly, beaten but not broken, his face painted in purples and reds. Ryuki, doesn't it hurt? The standing one asked. The question hung lightly in the air, not just about the physical pain. Not really, Ryuki replied after a pause, his voice steady but distant. I always got hurt like this. My grandpa was really hard on me, so I don't even count this as getting hurt. There was a pause, the silence deep and empathetic. Why did you stop? Came the next question. Not accusatory, just searching. Ryuki's lips parted slightly, but no words came at first. He stared out into the horizon. The construction yard below buzzed quietly in the distance. Near the end of the match, his opponent said, sitting now beside him, you stopped moving. Just for a second. If it weren't for that, the match would have still been up in the air. Ryuki tilted his head, puzzled. You didn't notice. Ryuki looked thoughtful, then blinked slowly. Okay, I guess I did stop moving. He remembered Okoya's voice after the match. Why did you hesitate? Okoya had asked. It wasn't criticism, it was confusion, because hesitation was not a luxury in their world. Ryuki closed his eyes, remembering the sensation, that moment of stillness, of something unfamiliar. He was pretty strong, he said quietly. In his mind, a blur of motion, the strongest opponent he'd fought in the Kengan matches so far. The man felt like an unstoppable wall, far and away the strongest opponent I faced. Then a whisper of a thought. I wonder who's stronger, him or Grandpa? His friend raised an eyebrow, watching Ryuki with concern. What kind of monster is this guy's grandpa anyway? A moment passed, There's only one way to beat someone like that, Ryuki said, more to himself than to anyone. Kill him. The words fell like a stone into water. No exaggeration, no flourish, just a grim statement of fact. In fact, I was just about ready to kill him, he added. His friend froze, eyes wide. Then I remembered what you said to me the other day. Ryuki lowered his eyes. He remembered every blow, every block, every breath. And in the midst of it all, something inside him had shifted. He flexed his arm, the muscles tense beneath the bruises. I guess, I have been killing people. His companion jolted. I haven't been killing normal people, okay? Ryuki wasn't defensive, just clear, honest. It just didn't click with me. I thought, what's wrong with killing someone who's trying to kill you? The words weren't callous. They were the distilled logic of a life raised in violence. His tone softened. But you know, something about it still bothers me. He looked up into the clouds. Am I going crazy? Koga, beside him, said nothing at first. His expression twisted with concern. A painful realization hit him. He just doesn't know. He's not a cold-blooded killer. He thinks he is, but he doesn't know what that truly means. There's still time. I can save Ryuki, Koga thought, a sense of urgency burning in his chest. Down the hallway of the rooftop, two suited figures emerged. Miss Akinama, one of them called. The moment was broken. Ryuki turned to the new arrival. Akoya Seishu, stern and composed. The man nodded solemnly. I've made up my mind on two more representative fighters. Koga turned. Ryuki blinked. Koka Ryuki and Akoya Seishu tentatively entered into the competition. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit room, far removed from the rooftop's solemn atmosphere, a shadowy figure sat, legs crossed, on a plush armchair. The room had a tattered grandeur. A man named Seiya was speaking into a phone. What? Can you repeat that? Yes, sir. My cover's been blown. The voice on the other end was cold, calm. Seiya grinned. This sure is tough work. It's easy to slip up when you spend too long with someone you're close to. Why don't you go to the hot spring? We'll pick up the pieces after you. As the call ended, the camera lingered on the battlefield. An unnamed spy executed in the dirt. A headless body knelt beside a shattered helmet. Smoke rose. I'm going to lay low until the dust settles. I don't think I can stay under cover. Back at the training grounds, Koga spoke quietly. Yeah, he wasn't that bad. Then a voice came over another call. Narushima Koga's officially become a fighter. I have a report for you, master. Seiya's grin widened. He closed his phone. Good work. We can use him as bait. All for the connector. Days later, a group walked down the road outside Tanikoa General Hospital. Koga, Ryuki, Kazuo Yamashita, and Kaidi Eki. But I don't like shots. It's just an examination, Kaidi replied with a sigh. Suddenly, Kazuo's phone buzzed. His eyes widened. Koga, I just got a call from CPW's Karachi. He looked frantic. Now listen, and promise me you won't freak out. Purgatory Gladiator. The 4D Latino, Shosei Kanzaki, lost. His opponent was the ex-sixth Fang of Metsudo, Yumigahama Hikaru. The scene was brutal. Shosei lay bloodied, unconscious, barely alive. Shosei's in critical condition, Kazuo said. He hasn't woken up yet. Inside the hospital, another fighter leaned against the wall. Funny coincidence that we'd be at the same hospital, Seki Bayashi Jun said. Koga arrived. Did Mr. Yamashita fill you in? Yeah. He got beaten pretty bad in his match. We haven't told Kaidi or Ryuki yet, Koga asked. How's Jose? Jun looked grave. Not good. It'll be up to his will to live. Later, Jun sighed heavily. I didn't watch the match, but I heard it was one-sided. Yumigahama's in the top class of Purgatory now. Then his voice softened. Koga, tell Mr. Yamashita that Haruo and I won't be entering the competition. Koga's face fell. I can't blame you. Shosei's gonna have to take an extended leave. If anything happened to me or Haruo too, CPW wouldn't be able to go on. We belong to an organization, Jun continued. We have to fill the hole that Jose left behind. His fists trembled. But still, it was a fair fight. We've got no reason to hate Yumigahama. Still, tears glistened in his eyes. At least Jose didn't go down for nothing.
He broke Yumigahama's dominant arm. His right arm, a final blow, a parting scar. He'll probably be in treatment until the competition, 2 months at least. June turned to Koga. We're counting on you, Koga. We're passing the torch to you. Koga clenched his fist, eyes burning. I'll avenge him in the competition. Yeah, trust me. Elsewhere, Yamashita sat wearily. Well, Sekibayashi and Haruo pulling out is a blow. You sure you can get enough fighters? Koga asked. Apparently Ryuki's injuries are light enough. He can enter. Still, Yamashita sighed. The fact that I don't have a full roster yet, it's not a good sign. A few days ago, he had tried to recruit Mikazuchi Rei, but Miss Reno put a stop to it. I don't want to use him as a political tool ever again, she had said. Another name came to mind. Hatsumi-sen. The man you've been looking for is just as hard to find. As Yamashita brooded, he recalled every fighter he couldn't count on. Yorozuka Sao-Peng, Nezu Masami, and others. One last name, Tokunoo Tokumichi. And so, the story marches forward, fists raised, wounds healing, shadows deepening. As the sun dipped lower behind the western peaks, the air cooled around the training grounds. Shifa stood on the edge of the field, his breath steady but his pulse drumming like war drums. Across from him, his opponent Rage, smiled with grim satisfaction, knowing that this next battle wasn't about glory, but conviction. You sure you're ready for this? Rage asked, stretching his arms. Last time didn't end well for Lena. Shifa didn't flinch. His eyes were sharper now, calmer too. I'm not just doing this for her, he replied. I'm doing it for me. The duel began without warning. Rage lunged, sword sweeping in a powerful arc, but Shifa's feet moved with practiced ease, sliding just enough to escape the blow. The ground beneath them cracked as their weapons clashed. Sparks scattered like fireflies. All eyes watched from the sidelines. Lena biting her lip, Rule clutching her hands together, Merlin wide-eyed, silent. Shifa ducked under another strike, pivoted, and summoned a short dagger from his ultra-speed storage. The blade caught Rage's side just enough to draw blood, and for a heartbeat, the crowd gasped. But Rage grinned, blood dripping. Not bad. He retaliated with a downward strike, and Shifa, instead of dodging, took it on the flat of his own summoned longsword, holding ground. The impact numbed his arm, but he stood firm. Back and forth the two danced, steel against steel, fist against flame. Shifa's movements, though not as flashy, carried the weight of discipline, of thousands of repetitions under his sister's harsh eye. Rage's strikes were brutal, instinctual, but Shifa began reading the patterns. He stepped back, creating space, and summoned the spear Rose had trained him to wield. With a steady hand, he hurled it, not to harm, but to test. Rage deflected it, but the brief distraction gave Shifa time to rush forward with his kodachi. A clean slash grazed Rage's cheek. I see, Rage muttered, wiping the blood. You've grown. The duel ended with both men panting, bruised and beaming. Yuri stepped in and declared it a draw. But they both knew, Shifa had held his own, perhaps even more than that. Later, as the moon rose and training ended, Lena approached him shyly. She offered a small bottle healing potion. You were amazing, she murmured. Even Rule said so. He took the bottle and nodded with a small smile. Thanks. Behind them, Rule watched quietly, then turned away. That night, in the dorms, Shifa lay in bed, eyes on the wooden ceiling. He wasn't the same boy who had trembled before Rose, and yet, her presence lingered like an echo. I'll see you soon, he whispered to the stars, clutching the pendant she had given him. The night was unusually warm as a soft coastal wind swept across the Kengan Association's private beach. Lanterns were hung overhead, flickering with warm light, and the beach was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clink of glasses. This wasn't just a social gathering. It was the prelude to a fight, a test of power wrapped in the casual disguise of festivity. Hidden from the public eye, guarded by fences and armed security, the secluded stretch of sand served as a battleground, where warriors would meet. Yamashita Kazuo looked particularly out of place among the towering figures of combatants and company executives. He clutched a drink, perspiring not from the heat, but the tension buzzing in the air. The neighboring lands owned by the Kengan Association too, he explained to the young men beside him. so we can be as loud as we want without anyone noticing. Narashima Koga nodded, observing the bonfire's glow dance in the eyes of the crowd. Didn't expect the association to own a whole beach. Beside him, Go Ryuki munched on a skewer of grilled meat, his eyes wandering. Still hot out, even at night, but their casual chatter was soon silenced. The crowd began to stir, murmuring with growing excitement. Two men stepped forward to the center of the sandy battleground, illuminated now by torches and cameras. This was more than an exhibition match. It was a duel that could shape the future of the tournament. On one side stood Mokichi Robinson, dressed in a traditional kimono, his long golden hair tied back neatly. Known as the exterminating vicar, he exuded a strange mixture of serene devotion and unshakable confidence. The cross of his clergy vestments shimmered faintly under the firelight. On the opposite end, clad in only a pair of leopard print shorts, stood Ryuto. His muscular frame was as imposing as ever, but it was the gleam in his eyes and the playful grin on his face that drew the crowd's attention. The Superman was back, and he was ready to prove he still belonged at the top. As they faced each other, a hush fell over the crowd. Mokichi stepped forward slightly. "Hi Ryuto, this is my first match in 2 years." Ryuto responded with a booming laugh. "You really made a comeback, didn't you? That's freaking awesome. Hey Mokichi, let me just say one thing before we start." He cracked his knuckles and gave his opponent a serious look. "So please, go easy on me." Mokichi chuckled. "I'll try not to end your career." The signal was given, and the crowd surged forward slightly, eager to witness what was to come. This was the culmination of months of silent buildup, of whispers and hopeful speculation. And now, two fighters stood on the sand with everything on the line. The atmosphere around Mokichi shifted instantly. His calm demeanor remained, but a focused sharpness crept into his gaze. His footing became lighter, balanced. Ryuto, by contrast, took a heavy stance, legs rooted, muscles tense, his usual grin hardening into a smirk of anticipation. They didn't need a referee. Their instincts knew when to act. The moment passed in a heartbeat. Sand exploded beneath Ryuto's feet as he lunged forward with tremendous speed. A right hook aimed at Mokichi's shoulder. Mokichi slipped sideways, his robe fluttering, and answered with a counter swipe, aimed at the side of Ryuto's neck. Cheers and gasps erupted around them. The clash of two styles was evident, one rooted in brute force and brawling ferocity, the other in fluid discipline and practiced precision. Ryuto growled as he adjusted his stance. "You're faster than you look, Vicar, and you're slower than you brag," Mokichi replied calmly. Their strikes exchanged again, arms colliding, fists grazing flesh, bodies dancing in the moonlight. The beach had become an arena of ancient tradition and modern violence. Meanwhile, Koga and Ryuki watched with unwavering focus. Koga clenched his fists, feeling the phantom echoes of every strike. "They're both insane, but this is exactly what I need to reach." Ryuki said nothing, but his eyes didn't blink once. Further back, Yamashita gulped. "This isn't just about representation," he muttered. "This is about legacy, about who's willing to put everything on the line." Mokichi weaved beneath a savage uppercut, and responded with a powerful palm strike that sent Ryuto skidding backward in the sand. The crowd roared, but Ryuto merely chuckled as he wiped the blood from his lip. "Oh man," he grinned, "now you've done it. I'm not holding back anymore." He charged forward with renewed fury. The sound of fists and flesh colliding echoed into the night, like drums of war keeping rhythm with the beating hearts of those who watched. And far above, the stars watched too, silent but ever present, as if bearing witness to the rebirth of warriors under their ancient gaze. This was more than a match.
It was the beginning of something far greater. The salty wind off the beach carried the scent of morning dew and heated sand, as faint waves whispered along the shore. The sky was already painted in blazing gold, the sun glaring over a makeshift wooden arena built by hand, lined with driftwood stakes and surrounded by spectators in light summer robes. Ryuto stood with arms crossed, looking at his opponent, the shy but determined Mokichi Robinson. There was no anger in his posture, only a barely veiled sense of superiority. His trademark shades gleamed even under the cloud-split sun, and he cracked his neck lazily. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. Mokichi didn't flinch. He stepped forward in silence, taking a deep breath. His frame was lean, his demeanor modest, but his eyes were sharp. No boast, no bravado, just quiet resolve. A shout rang out. Begin. The moment the call ended, Mokichi dashed forward with a speed that startled the onlookers. In the blink of an eye, he was upon Rahido, his fist already in motion. Rahido's eyes widened, and then instincts kicked in. He weaved back, avoiding the punch by a hair, gritting his teeth. Huh? Rahido scoffed. You're fast, I'll give you that. Mokichi didn't respond. Instead he flowed into another attack, this time a low sweep kick that nearly knocked Rahido off balance. The fang of Matsudo caught himself, grinning now. Not bad, nerd, he growled, leaping back to reset his stance. But you're still not good enough. He came back with his own charge, his arm swinging like a blade, only to feel air. Mokichi ducked beneath the strike and delivered a swift elbow to Rahido's ribs. The impact was sharp, and Rahido stumbled back, coughing once. From the sidelines, murmurs began, whispers of surprise. Wait, is Robinson actually holding his own? I thought he was just some polite pushover. Sweat glistened on Mokichi's forehead as he took a defensive posture. His breath came steady, controlled. Rahido lunged again, this time faster, more calculated. A right jab, then a feint to the left. Mokichi parried both, redirecting them with graceful sways and palm-guided slips. This time, when Rahido's hand lashed out with his razor's edge technique, fingers slicing the air like blades, Mokichi finally spoke. I've studied your moves, he said calmly, catching the attack on his shoulder and pivoting into a counterpunch. The blow connected. Rahido staggered. A bruise blossomed beneath his jawline. He spat into the sand and laughed. You're really going all out, huh? The crowd tensed, expecting him to lose his temper. But instead, he dropped into a low stance. Fine. You want serious? You got it. He moved faster now, his fists a blur of swipes and slashes. Mokichi dodged left, right, dropped low. He took a few hits, a grazing swipe across the temple, a punch to the ribs, but kept his footing. Then Rahido overreached. In that half-second of imbalance, Mokichi stepped in. A precise palm thrust hit Rahido's solar plexus. The bigger man choked on air and fell to one knee. Damn, he muttered, one hand digging into the sand. Mokichi panted, backing off. His eyes never left Rahido. Are you done? He asked softly. Rahido stared up at him. The ocean breeze tousled both their hair. For a moment, silence, and then Rahido chuckled. Guess it underestimated you. He stood up, brushing sand off his knees. I was gonna call you boring, but you got guts. Mokichi blinked. He wasn't sure whether to thank him or stay quiet. Next time, Rahido added, cracking his knuckles, I'll go full power from the start. I'll be ready, Mokichi replied. The two stepped apart, both breathing hard, but standing tall. Yamashita Kazuo, sitting under a parasol nearby, wiped sweat from his forehead. Well, that was unexpected. Back on the beach, the crowd burst into applause, not for a winner, but for a fight between equals. The sun climbed higher, the sea shimmered, and in the heart of that glowing morning, something changed, not just between Mokichi and Rahido, but in the way others looked at them. Two fighters, two paths, one moment of mutual respect. The night sky stretched endlessly above the private beach of the Kengan Association, lit softly by the warm golden flicker of a bonfire. Flames danced in the breeze, casting fleeting shadows on the faces of the gathered crowd. Fighters, managers and spectators, all drawn here for the same reason. The air was alive with chatter and laughter, the clinking of glasses and the scent of grilled food drifting across the sand. Hard to believe they have a whole beach to themselves, Koga said, eyes drifting toward the distant waves. The night was warm, unnaturally so for the season, but it only amplified the festive air. Rikichi stood beside him, holding a skewer in one hand, eyes wide at the scale of it all. It's still pretty hot out. It's a popular spot in the summer, I hear. Yeah, Yamashita chimed in with a laugh, sipping from a cup. The land around here is owned by the Kengan Association too. Means we can get as loud as we want, and no one'll call the cops. But amidst the cheerful gathering, two men stood facing each other on the sand, apart from the crowd. The firelight reflected off their bodies, casting stark shadows on the arena drawn crudely into the beach. Mokichi Robinson, the exterminating vicar, stood tall in traditional garb, his posture calm but his eyes sharp, and opposite him, muscles taut beneath skin tanned and scarred from battle, stood Rahido, the Superman. Shirtless save for a pair of wild leopard print shorts, his grin wide and confident. Mokichi, Rahido, a familiar voice rang out from the sidelines. It was Elena Robinson, waving both hands in the air, her cheeks flushed with energy. Both of you, do your best. Rahido blinked, looked her up and down, and without much thought, murmured under his breath, Elena's gotten pretty hot, huh? Mokichi's aura darkened instantly. I see you have a death wish. Behind them Koga broke into a nervous sweat. That was a close one. He was seriously gonna hit on her. Isn't there a single normal fighter among us? Rikichi muttered. Yamashita pushed up his glasses with a chuckle. Well, Mokichi usually has a strong sense of character, except when it comes to his sister. The tension on the sand slowly built as the crowd began to settle. Koga raised his voice, explaining to a few newcomers, this isn't just a regular match, it's a screening. The winner might get a spot in the competition, and the winning corporation gets the rights to purchase an 1855 Chateau Bunan vintage. Someone added from behind. Mokichi shifted his stance, his robe swaying gently with the breeze. Though he still wore a calm smile, there was a hardness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. I'd prefer you didn't call me brother, he muttered as Rahido bounced on his heels across from him. Haha, just kidding man. Relax, brother tilde. Rahido laughed, flexing and striking exaggerated poses, but it wasn't a joke to Mokichi anymore. Yamashita's eyes narrowed. Rahido's stance, it's different, it's more compact, more refined. The image of the old Rahido, wild, unguarded, chaotic, began to fade in his mind. The man standing here had changed. As the referee Yamamoto Koshi stepped forward, his voice rang out across the beach with authority. Mokichi, Rahido, welcome back to the matches. Both men turned slightly, nodding in his direction. I'll stop the match if it becomes too dangerous, Koshi added, planting himself between them. Take your stance, he commanded. A heavy silence blanketed the beach. Even the crackling of the fire faded into the background. The fighters raised their arms. Energy gathered around them like a charged storm about to break. And then, Koshi's arm dropped like thunder. Begin. Sand exploded beneath their feet as both men launched forward, sprinting with all their might. Rahido's muscles rippled under the strain of his dash, his footfalls deep and feral. Mokichi's robes fluttered behind him, like the trailing feathers of a hawk in mid-dive. Every inch of his body focused forward. From the sidelines, Rikichi took a bite of grilled fish, eyes wide with childlike wonder. They're fast, and indeed they were. So fast, the world itself seemed to slow as they closed the distance. Their footwork kicked up trails of sand, lines drawn by momentum, by battle. The crowd didn't breathe. No one blinked. As they met at the center, their fists, willpower, and ideals colliding, only one thought echoed in everyone's minds. This was more than a fight, it was a test of who they had become. Under the burning night sky at the Kengan Association's private beach, the crowd buzzed with restless excitement. They had gathered not just for another evening of entertainment, but for a confrontation years in the making. A clash between two warriors whose paths had diverged long ago, only to meet now in the ring once more. The firelight from the torches flickered against the sand, casting long shadows around the fighters, who stood face to face, surrounded by onlookers hungry for battle. With a thunderous cry from the referee, Yamamoto Koshi, the match officially began. Begin, he bellowed, his raised arm slicing through the air like a guillotine. And with that, Mokichi Robinson and Rahido sprang into motion, kicking up sand as they closed the distance in a blur of muscle and intensity. The atmosphere surged with raw energy. The audience gasped, already swept up in the fight's swift and explosive tempo. Rahido charged forward with uncharacteristic precision. He was a completely different fighter than the one the Kengan world had known 2 years ago. His movements were clean, tight, and efficient. Gone was the brute force style that had once defined him. Now, his blows were crisp, calculated combinations, each one flowing into the next, with alarming fluidity. Even Yamashita Kozuo couldn't believe his eyes, his expression contorted with awe. His moves are so efficient, he muttered, astounded, as Rahido drove forward,
like a machine of destruction. Mokichi, however, didn't falter. He stood tall, his robe fluttering slightly in the sea breeze, as he absorbed the flurry of attacks with practiced discipline. Despite being on the defensive, his presence remained composed, eyes narrowed with focus, arms raised to block with precision honed over years. Rihido's fists cracked into Mokichi's guard again and again, yet the priestly fighter weathered the storm without breaking. "This is incredible," one of the onlookers whispered, watching the clash unfold with growing intensity. The spectators could barely keep up as the two fighters exchanged strikes with brutal speed. Mokichi pivoted, his robe swirling with the motion, and retaliated with a powerful counterstrike. But Rihido ducked low, rotating with an agility that seemed impossible for his build, and launched a spinning elbow toward Mokichi's ribs. Flashbacks echoed through the minds of the veterans watching, memories of Rihido as he once was, reckless, wild, fierce. But back then, he relied solely on his natural strength, lacking the refinement of technique. Now, every move he made was deliberate. It was clear to all who watched, Rihido hadn't wasted the last 2 years. He had trained, studied, evolved. "Rihido's using combinations," someone shouted. "He's moving like a completely different person from 2 years ago," another added. On the sideline, Kazuo's jaw dropped as he realized just how much the once unruly fighter had grown. The old Rihido would use brute force tactics, relying only on his innate talents, but he's mastered technique over the past 2 years. The transformation was undeniable. This wasn't some showy brawler anymore. This was a disciplined martial artist. Still, Mokichi was no pushover. As Rihido pressed on with his blistering attacks, Mokichi shifted into a defensive stance that flowed like water. His feet glided silently across the sand, subtly adjusting his position, reducing the power behind each blow he absorbed. He was searching, reading the rhythm of Rihido's offense, waiting for a gap to exploit. Their feet pounded against the beach, kicks slicing through the air. A knee strike missed Mokichi by inches. As he pivoted to the left, sand sprayed into the night as their battle churned the ground beneath them. It wasn't just a fight of fists, it was a war of wills, strategy and pride. The sound of impact echoed like drum beats, accentuated by gasps and cheers from the crowd. And yet, beneath the visible violence, there was a strange reverence between them. Despite their fierce expressions and crushing blows, these two weren't fighting out of hatred. They were fighting for something more, perhaps respect, perhaps redemption, perhaps to measure themselves against someone who truly understood the path they'd walked. Then came Rihido's war cry. "Yo, a shout that rose over the roar of the fire and the murmurs of the sea. His muscles tensed as he unleashed a devastating punch aimed at Mokichi's chest, a strike filled with everything he had built up over years of training. But Mokichi didn't flinch. His eyes locked on Rihido's, and in that instant, their battle reached its peak. The clash was no longer just physical, it was emotional, symbolic, a resurrection for Mokichi, a rite of passage for Rihido, and the night was far from over. The moment the referee's voice thundered with the word "begin," the beach exploded into motion. Rihido, muscles rippling, and eyes blazing with intensity, launched forward with the precision and speed of a bullet. Sand exploded beneath his feet, as his bare soles slammed into the ground with powerful strides. His leopard print shorts flared with each motion, muscles in his legs and back flexing as he hurtled toward Mokichi Robinson. Opposite him, Mokichi was already moving. Despite his priestly robes and calm aura, there was no mistaking the fighter within. He surged forward, robes fluttering, as he lowered his stance, cutting through the distance like a blade. The crowd watching held their breath. The clash was imminent. Their gap closed in seconds. Rihido opened with a dynamic feint, kicking sand up with a sudden skid, before diving into a rapid combination. His fists moved with startling precision, no longer wild or unpredictable like they had been 2 years ago. A right hook blurred through the air, followed by a lightning-fast jab, and a left uppercut. Mokichi's arms rose to meet the assault, blocking blow after blow. Rihido didn't let up. His movements flowed like water. His footwork agile, his posture tight, his blows compact and efficient. Yamashita Kazuo, watching with wide eyes, couldn't hide his shock. "His moves are so efficient," he exclaimed. The others nearby murmured in agreement, Rahido had transformed. Gao Ryuki blinked. He's using combinations, he noted, awe creeping into his voice. He's coordinated. Indeed, Rahido was moving like a completely different person from the one they'd known before. Gone was the brute force brawler who relied solely on instinct and raw strength. In his place stood a honed fighter, still wild at heart, but now armed with refined skill and discipline. He struck again, this time with a swift low kick. Crack. The sound echoed like a whip. His foot smashed into Mokichi's leg, with brutal force, but Mokichi didn't even flinch. Narushima Koga gasped aloud, stunned. He didn't even bat an eye. Rahido blinked. What the hell is that priest made of? He muttered under his breath. His low kick had been heavy. Most opponents would have at least stumbled. But Mokichi didn't yield. The exterminating vicar countered immediately. As Rahido stepped back from his failed low kick, Mokichi stepped forward with a seamless strike. His punch was a straight unfaltering bolt, aimed with perfect form. It connected. Smack. Rahido's head snapped to the side, spittle flying from his mouth, his cheeks rippling from the force of the hit. But Mokichi wasn't done. His hand suddenly lashed out, gripping Rahido's hair in a firm clench. His muscles shifted, his weight dropped, and in a motion as fluid as it was brutal, Mokichi slammed his. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Rahido groaned, eyes wide in pain as the powerful knee strike connected with his torso. Mokichi's form didn't waver. His grip remained ironclad, his strikes precise and relentless. Even as sand flared up around them from their clash, he held Rahido in place like a hawk pinning down its prey. But Rahido wasn't down yet. Blood trickled from his mouth, but his eyes still burned. Mokichi's movements were methodical, each action stemming from years of refined training. He was a tactician in the body of a warrior monk. His knees pounded into Rahido's side with force that echoed in the bones of those watching. Yet Rahido dug his heels into the ground, bracing, defying the punishment. Gritting his teeth, he tightened his core and swung an elbow. The strike connected with Mokichi's side. There was no clean break, only a clash of bone and will. Rahido roared, his body refusing to yield. Mokichi's stance shifted slightly under the blow, his expression stoic as ever. But in that moment, everyone watching saw it. This wasn't a mismatch. This was a true battle of strength, skill and soul, and it was only just beginning. The crowd stood breathless at the edge of the ring, a stretch of sand glimmering under the moonlight, ringed by torches and the low murmur of the sea. The atmosphere was electric, every eye locked on the two titans poised in combat. Rahido, the Superman, launched forward like a thunderbolt. His powerful legs pounded the sand, throwing clouds of dust into the air. Across from him, Mokichi Robinson, clad in a traditional gi, lowered his stance with disciplined calm. Begin. The referee's voice ripped through the silence, and the moment shattered into motion. Both fighters surged ahead. Rahido closed the gap with ferocious speed, fists clenched, his lean muscles taut with anticipation. Mokichi was already mid-step, his robes flowing behind him, face unreadable. Rahido struck first, his foot swept through the sand with a scratch, heralding his flying punch. Mokichi raised his guard just in time, the blow clashing with his arms in a loud smack. But Rahido was relentless, a machine of speed and strength, throwing punch after punch in a perfectly drilled combination. Left, right, feint, uppercut. His fists moved like twin pistons. He's using combinations, cried out Yamashita Kazuo, his glasses catching the firelight, eyes wide. His moves are so efficient. Mokichi staggered, barely keeping up with the onslaught, forced to absorb each blow with composure. His curly blonde hair bounced with each dodge, his face like stone. He wasn't surprised, he was analyzing. But something was different. Yamashita noticed it first. He's moving like he's a completely different person from 2 years ago. Indeed, this was not the same Rahido, who once relied only on brute strength and instinct. This Rahido had honed technique. This Rahido had learned how to fight with discipline. But he's mastered technique over the past 2 years, Kazuo exclaimed again, as Mokichi caught Rahido's wrist and countered with a powerful sweep. Rahido snarled and twisted, deflecting with his shoulder, then drove a low, devastating kick into Mokichi's thigh. The thud echoed, but Mokichi didn't even flinch. What the hell is that priest made of? Rahido's mind reeled. That kick should have buckled anyone else's leg. From the sidelines, Narushima Koga gaped. He didn't even bat an eye. But the match wasn't waiting for commentary. Mokichi's hands shot forward in a blur. A barrage of punches connected, fist to shoulder, palm to chest, elbow to chin. Rahido grit his teeth as the impact reverberated through his muscles, and then Mokichi pivoted low and lunged, seizing Rahido in a bear-like grip. His arm looped around Rahido's neck, dragging him down, while his other arm locked around the ribs. Rahido grunted, trying to shake free. Mokichi's grip was iron, his motion fluid. He spun on his heel, dragging Rahido by the neck and arm, and forced him down into the sand. How about a body slam? Rahido bellowed in defiance, lifting Mokichi overhead in a desperate counter, legs trembling. But Mokichi anticipated it. He used the upward momentum to twist midair, wrapping his long legs around Rahido's shoulders. A triangle choke, cried Kazuo. Hang in there, Rahido, Koga shouted, leaning forward. The fighters crashed to the sand, Mokichi's legs locking tighter around Rahido's neck. The triangle wasn't perfect, but it was close. Rahido's vision began to blur, sweat beading along his brow. Neither of them's kicked into gear yet. The crowd murmured, stunned by the level of raw power and technique on display. Inside the hold, Rahido clenched his teeth, veins bulging. He wasn't going to go down here. Mokichi stared into his eyes from below, calm as always, but with a glimmer of respect. I guess you've improved yourself, he muttered with a smile. If I were fighting the old you from 2 years ago, this would have already been over. Rahido's thoughts spun. Son of a bitch. He's not moving like he did 2 years ago. Forget that. He's even more sharp now. The battle was far from over. The sand beneath them bore the imprint of war. Every footprint a testament to the clash of warriors, unwilling to back down. The triangle choke tightened, but so did Rahido's will.